When Nero first became emperor at just 16 years old, many Romans thought they were entering a golden age. He lowered taxes, sponsored public games and shows, and even stepped on stage himself, performing in plays that made ordinary people cheer. For a while, it seemed like he might actually be the kind of ruler people could love. But power has a way of twisting even the brightest young stars, and by 65 AD, Nero's mind was no longer steady. Maybe it was the constant fear that everyone wanted his throne. Maybe it was the loneliness of being a man no one could challenge or correct. Or maybe it had to do with the woman who captured his heart in a way that changed everything. Her name was Poppaea Sabina. She wasn't just beautiful. She was sharp, ambitious, and bold, the perfect match for Nero's grand dreams. At the time, Nero was already married to Octavia, the daughter of the previous emperor. But their marriage was cold, a political match without love. Octavia was quiet, private, and reserved. Poppaea was the exact opposite, confident, lively, and dazzling, the kind of woman who demanded attention wherever she went. Nero's affair with her began as just another Roman scandal, but it quickly spiraled into something much more dangerous. He wasn't simply in love with Poppaea, he was obsessed with her. His advisors noticed how unstable he became, furious if other men even looked at her too long. He surrounded her with guards, not really for her safety, but to control her every move. He showered her with treasures from every corner of the empire: gems, silks, perfumes, and nearly drained the empire's funds to keep her pleased. His obsession didn't stop there. Nero divorced Octavia in a shocking move that angered many, then staged a lavish wedding to Poppaea, sparing no expense. But even marriage wasn't enough for him. He cut her off from friends and family, filling her life with people who owed their loyalty to him alone. He filled his chambers with paintings and statues of her, so he could admire her face even when she wasn't around. Sometimes, ancient writers say, he would spend hours just watching her go about her daily life. This wasn't love, it was possession. Nero saw her not as a partner, but as something beautiful he owned. Poppaea, however, wasn't naive. She knew her looks, and Nero's obsession gave her enormous influence, but she also knew how dangerous that power could be. She used her position to help her family and build a circle of allies to protect her if Nero ever turned against her. Still, she had one weakness: she wasn't afraid to challenge him. Unlike everyone else at court, who bent to his moods, Poppaea stood her ground. She argued with him over politics, mocked his performances if they were bad, and refused to be a silent ornament. That independence, which had first attracted Nero, would later prove to be the most dangerous thing of all. On that tragic day in 65 AD, the stories told by ancient writers don't all match, but the ending is always the same. It began as a normal household fight. Some say Nero came home late after watching chariot races. Others claim it was about his obsession with acting and music. Whatever the reason, the argument quickly spiraled out of control. Poppaea, who was pregnant at the time with their second child, dared to tell Nero that he cared more about his public image than about being a husband and father. Maybe it was the stress of pregnancy, maybe it was the constant strain of living with a man like Nero, but she refused to stay quiet. That was enough to make the emperor explode. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, he either kicked or struck her, so violently that she collapsed, badly injured. Some say it was a single blow to her stomach. Others say it was a savage beating. But either way, the result was the same: she lay bleeding on the cold marble floor, her life slipping away. Imagine the moment Nero realized what he had done. This was the man who ruled 60 million people, who commanded vast armies, who was treated like a god in distant lands, and yet, in one outburst of anger, he destroyed the only person he truly loved. The woman he had obsessed over, the woman he couldn't live without, was dying because of him. Ancient writers say he fell apart in a way that shocked even those used to his outbursts. He threw himself over Papia's body, begging her to forgive him, ordering her to live, as if his power could force death itself to obey. Doctors were rushed in, bribed with promises of riches and threatened with torture if they failed, but it was hopeless. Within hours, Papia was gone, and with her, the unborn child who might have been Nero's heir. From that moment, something inside Nero shattered completely. His grief wasn't just sadness, it was madness. He refused to have her cremated as Roman custom demanded. Instead, he had her body embalmed and placed in a grand tomb more magnificent than any emperor before her. He declared her a goddess, ordered a cult in her honor, and spent hours speaking to her embalmed corpse as if she could still answer. In the palace, the madness spread. Court officials were expected to play along with the illusion that Papia was still alive. Her seat at banquets was left empty, as if she would walk in at any moment. Anyone who suggested it was time for Nero to move on was punished, exiled, or even killed. It was during this period of grief and delusion that a young boy named Sporus came into Nero's life, completely unaware of the nightmare waiting for him. Sporus was probably only 14 or 15, born into slavery in the imperial household, but freed at a young age. He had grown up inside the palace walls, well-educated and trained for service. Compared to many others, his life wasn't terrible. Freedmen often lived more comfortably than poor Roman citizens, but everything depended on the emperor's favor. A freedman could rise high in influence one day and be crushed the next, with no protection. What made Sporus stand out wasn't his education or his skills, it was his face. Ancient writers agree that the boy looked shockingly like Papia, especially his eyes and delicate features. In a time when Romans believed physical resemblance hinted at spiritual connection, this likeness would have seemed eerie, almost supernatural. The first time Nero looked at Sporus after Papia's death, something snapped in his broken mind. In Sporus, he thought he saw a chance to undo the unforgivable, a way to bring back the woman he had destroyed with his own hands. The moment Nero laid eyes on Sporus, the resemblance to Papia was so strong that it must have shaken him to his core. For a second, he may have actually believed her spirit had returned, reborn in this boy. But there was one obvious problem: Sporus was male. To anyone else, that would have been the end of it. But Nero was no ordinary man. He had already spent months whispering to his dead wife's embalmed body, convincing himself he was a god. In his warped mind, changing someone's gender was just another way to bend reality. And so began one of the cruelest acts in history. Nero didn't simply force Sporus to wear women's clothing. He ordered doctors to make it permanent. The boy was dragged into the palace's private chambers, where Nero's physicians prepared to operate. Roman surgery was brutal, crude tools, almost no real pain relief, and a terrifying risk of infection. Guards would have held Sporus down as he screamed, knowing no one would help him. The procedure left him scarred in every possible way. Even if he survived, his body, his future, and his very sense of self were gone forever. He would never father children, never live as a man, and never again be seen as fully human in the eyes of Roman society. Nero had ripped away not just his freedom, but his identity. But the nightmare didn't stop there. Once Sporus had recovered, if you can call it recovery, Nero announced something that stunned even the decadent Roman elite. He was going to marry him. Preparations began for a full imperial wedding, planned with all the grandeur usually reserved for an empress. Sporus was renamed Sabina after the dead woman he was meant to replace, and moved into special quarters to be trained for his new role. Seamstresses worked tirelessly to create gowns that hid the traces of his masculine frame. Jewelers crafted ornaments using gems that had once belonged to Papia herself, turning them into chains of memory binding him to the dead. Makeup artists taught him how to paint his face, how to widen his eyes with kohl, how to paint his cheeks with rouge, how to cover every trace of the boy he once was. And then came the endless lessons in how to be a Roman lady. Hairdressers curled and pinned his hair in elaborate styles that could take hours, burning his scalp with heated tools. Tutors drilled him in feminine manners, how to walk gracefully, how to sit with delicate poise, how to fold his hands just so. Voice coaches worked on his speech, forcing him to soften his tone and raise his pitch, teaching him to mimic the speech patterns of high-born women. Every single day was a reminder that his old self was gone. Every mirror showed him a stranger's face. Every jeweled bracelet was a shackle, a piece of the dead woman he was forced to become. The wedding was set for the spring of 67 AD, carefully timed to coincide with Rome's religious festivals, so it would appear grand and sacred. To the world, it looked like another one of Nero's bizarre spectacles. But for Sporus, it was the final act of a nightmare, his stolen identity paraded as entertainment, his very existence twisted into a cruel echo of the woman Nero could not let go. Nero went all out for the wedding, sparing no cost in treating it like the grandest imperial ceremony Rome had ever seen. The palace's largest hall was transformed into a dazzling stage walls lined with exotic flowers brought from faraway lands, thousands of oil lamps burning bright, and music echoing through the air as musicians played the traditional wedding songs. Servants carried trays of the finest wines and foods, offering guests endless luxuries. To someone who didn't know the truth, it may have looked like a normal royal wedding, but to those who did, it was chilling. Everyone understood they were witnessing something shocking. The Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man alive, marrying a teenage boy who had been surgically altered and forced to dress as his dead wife. The ceremony followed every Roman tradition. Vows were exchanged, hands were joined, sacred bread was shared, and official documents were signed to make the union legal. Guests smiled, clapped, and handed over expensive gifts, but behind the masks of joy was unease. The air must have been heavy with fear, curiosity, and disbelief, the kind of nervous energy that comes from being part of something everyone knows is wrong, but no one dares to question. After the wedding, Nero treated Sporus as if he were truly an empress. The young man was given his own staff, his own quarters inside the palace, and a generous income from the imperial treasury. He traveled in a litter carried by servants, rode fine horses, and was trailed by attendants wherever he went. To an outsider, it looked like luxury, but the truth was far darker. All of it came at the cost of Sporus' freedom and identity. He wasn't living his own life anymore. He was forced to act out a role every day, every moment. Sporus sat beside Nero at state dinners, appeared at public ceremonies, and was expected to play the perfect wife in every way. Nero even called him by Papayia's name and spoke about memories from their marriage as if Sporus had lived with them. To survive, Sporus had to play along, nodding, smiling, and answering as if the false memories were his own. Ancient writers say he became frighteningly good at this performance, able to anticipate Nero's moods before they turned dangerous. But they also note how Sporus grew quieter, more withdrawn, carrying a deep sadness beneath the mask he was forced to wear. Imagine waking up every morning in rooms decorated with things that belonged to someone you never knew, seeing a reflection in the mirror that no longer looked like you, and being forced to live as a ghost of a dead woman. That was Sporus' life for more than 2 years. When Nero decided to tour Greece, showing off his talents in music and theater at Greek festivals, Sporus went with him. Nero paraded him before foreign leaders as the Empress of Rome. Imagine the bewildered looks of Greek nobles conquered by Rome's armies watching their ruler arrive with a teenage boy dressed as a woman, demanding everyone treat the charade as truth. But by 68 AD, Nero's grip on power finally broke. His reckless spending, obsession with art, and cruelty had pushed Rome's leaders to the edge. Revolts spread across the empire. Governors rose against him, and even his own Praetorian Guard turned their backs. The Senate officially declared Nero an enemy of the state, Desperate and abandoned, Nero fled the city with a handful of loyal followers. And even then, as he ran for his life, he refused to leave Sporus behind. They hid together in a villa just outside Rome, waiting in fear, hoping for rescue, but knowing capture and death were closing in. As Nero's power started slipping away, he kept going back and forth between wild escape plans and dramatic ideas about ending his own life. When he finally heard that his enemies were almost at his door, he chose suicide rather than be captured. But with Nero gone, Sporus was left exposed and completely vulnerable. He was a reminder of Nero's rule, which made him both valuable to those fighting for power and dangerous to keep around. What happened after was even more tragic. Sporus was treated like a prize to be passed around, owned by one man after another. First Nitius Sabinus took him, then Otho, and later Vitellius. Each one forced him to keep living the same cruel game Nero had started, dressing him as a woman and calling him by Poppaea's name. Under Vitellius, Sporus' suffering reached its worst point. The emperor planned to use him as entertainment in the Colosseum, making him act out brutal myths designed to shame and humiliate him in front of thousands of people. For Sporus, this was too much to bear. After years of being controlled, abused, and denied the right to live as himself, he finally made a decision of his own. Rather than face that last humiliation, he chose to end his life, likely by poison. Sometime in 69 AD, he was only about 20 years old. In death, Sporus escaped the cruel stage that had trapped him. Sadly, ancient writers did not care much about Sporus as a person. They only saw him as a symbol of Rome's corruption. But what makes his story so painful is not only the abuse he suffered, but how completely his own identity was erased. From the moment Nero decided Sporus looked like Poppaea, he stopped being treated as himself and was forced to live out someone else's twisted fantasy. Yet in his final choice, he showed strength, refusing to let them break him any further, even if it meant dying. The saddest part is that we know almost nothing about who Sporus really was before all this. What were his hopes? What kind of life did he dream of? We'll never know, because that part of him was stolen. All that remains is the story of a boy who was forced to become someone he wasn't, who endured unbearable pain, and who finally found freedom by taking control of his fate. His story should be remembered not as a strange detail from ancient history, but as proof of how cruel power can be, and how even in the darkest times, a spark of courage can survive, with voices like his still crying out to be heard even after 2,000 years.